When we mention Arab art, most people who are unaware of the region would be surprised to know that art has been seamlessly expressed over many millennia. Before Islam, art in the Arab world was found in civilizations like the Mesopotamians, Canaanites, and ancient Egyptians. Now, before anyone attempts to make the distinction that these civilizations weren't Arab but were quote-unquote Arabized later on in history, it will suffice to provide this reminder. All these civilizations and their descendants did indeed become Arab. Art in the Arab world saw a resurgence by the 19th century and to the present, where there is a booming art scene that has yet to achieve its true potential. Joining us in this talk is Dr. Basel Dalloul, the founder and chairman of the Dalloul Art Foundation, a cultural institution that is home to an extensive collection of modern and contemporary visual art from the Arab world. Dalloul Art Foundation, known as DAF, is a custodian of around 3,000 artworks comprising different media. Although his background is in engineering and technology, Basel's trial-by-fire journey within the foundation has seen him inherit a collection of artworks started by his parents, Ramzi and Saida, then expanding it to include large portfolios of established and up-and-coming Arab artists, to now becoming the leading center of expertise and education when it comes to the history and story of art in the Arab world. Well, thank you, Basel, for joining the Candidi Chronicles. We're really excited to have you as a guest, and hopefully the discussion is going to be a very enlightening one.
I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Basel, I'd like to start with one of the elements that we really like to dive deep into on this channel, and that's history. And obviously, we're talking about Arab art, so the history of Arab art kind of begins without Arabs in the sense that they're the generators of the art. It's actually foreigners who are generating most of that art over the last, let's say, 150 years, maybe 250 years, sorry. And that's with Orientalist, the Orientalist art movement. I'd like to get your reading on what's really the value of that movement in general, from a Western perspective, and then more specifically from an Arab-centric perspective. What does it tell us about our culture, our history, and our identity?
There's a couple of things I want to address. I mean, art, we've had art for hundreds of years, thousands of years actually, in this part of the world, be it Islamic art or Pharaonic art, or before that, Canaanite art, Sumerian art. So art's been something. It's not something that just kind of descended on us Arabs. Now, as far as Orientalism is concerned, Orientalism is kind of a distorted view of how the West views us Arabs. Of course, it covers all of the stereotypes, if you will, that they like to show. What they think of Arabs or people from this part of the world. The naked women laying around, the strong man with the sword, and that type of thing. It's an interesting view, but it's the West's view of us in this part of the world. I wouldn't say it's how we've been influenced by art, because art, if you go back in history, has existed for a lot longer than most Western civilizations have. So from that perspective, art's been something I think that's kind of always been, and craftsmanship has been intrinsic in our culture of all sorts. I mean, Western civilization started in this part of the world, not the other way around, contrary to popular myth. So I don't know if that answers your question, but as far as Orientalist art is concerned, I think it's some of the art is beautiful. It's some of the artists are masterful painters. Unfortunately, the subject matter that they're covering and the way they're covering it. If this were the only way a greater majority of people were to see what Arabs were like in the West, then they would have a very distorted view of what we are.
That's from a Western perspective. Are there any positive takeaways from that collection of art that I guess really spanned the end of the 18th century towards the end of the 19th century? Are there any positive takeaways for Arabs themselves from this art?
I don't know, in what sense do you mean positive takeaways?
I mean, in terms of, does it inform us to some aspect? I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, the art is quite beautiful, but does it inform us?
Positive. Sorry, we live in Lebanon and power goes and comes. It just constantly
I saw. It's okay.
So it informs us that the West kind of sees us in a not so nice way. That's what it informs me about. You did actually a podcast on this subject. We had a conversation about it, I think, once before, about the real bad Arabs and how for over 100 years Hollywood and Western media has been villainizing Arabs and the typical the terrorist, the hook-nosed, big-browed, oil digging Arab billionaire who's not so sophisticated. I mean, these are the images that you'll see in the cinema in the West and the portrayals. And to some degree, this whole Orientalism thing kind of, I think, kind of plays into that as well, or that plays into those portrayals of what we looked like. But as far as informing us of anything other than how the West portrays us, I don't know. Is that what you meant when you asked me that question?
Well, I think, yeah, to a certain extent, yes. I think the element is quite clear that there is a kind of elitist view of from a Western perspective towards the Arab world, the Arab life in general, through all these stereotypical representations. I was just, exploring whether there was any positive elements, at least in terms of understanding even the most superficial of things from our history as Arabs within this collection of art. Well, let me rephrase. Are there any ethical Orientalists?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know. I mean, again, look, everybody sees things from their own perspective, through their own eyes. So you asked whether there were any ethical Orientalists, I think is what the question was, whether there were any ethical Orientalists. Honestly, I don't know what you mean by ethical Orientalist.
Are there any artists that actually represented, let's say, some of the positive elements of Arab life or Arab culture in their expressions, in their Orientalist expressions?
Well, look, I mean, they showed a very vibrant society. I mean, all the paintings, the Orientalist paintings that I grew up around, because we did have in the family an Orientalist collection, and some of these paintings were magnificent portrayals of whether it was how the folks were dressed or what the architecture was like or how vibrant the marketplaces were. You had those obligatory stereotypical ones as well, but there were ones that were rather nice portrayals of what life looked like back then. I mean, and Orientalists came from all over Europe. There were German Orientalists, there were Dutch Orientalists, there were Italian Orientalists, French Orientalists. They ran the gamut. English Orientalists.
Ottoman Orientalists.
Ottoman Orientalists, absolutely. So
I think one element you did mention that kind of intrigues me. You mentioned about how the West likes to tell their own version of a story, as I just mentioned with the Orientalist movement. What about the actual story or the history of Arab art itself? I guess from the late 19th century onwards, how much do we know, or how structured is our understanding of our own art versus how the West perceives the progress and development of Arab art?
Right. Well, look, I mean, you have to know the history of this part of the world. I mean, we had a very rich culture that actually put art in the forefront. Now, whether this was in the form of Islamic art, which is mostly geometric and repetitive, or even the art that came from the churches from the region, because if you look at from like late 19th, 20th century to the current, to the present, art came from, and we had also 400 years of Ottoman Empire rule, where basically they turned off the brains of most everybody in the region. A good people was an ignorant people was the motto of the empire, I suppose. And so this whole region went through a few centuries of ignorance, where all of those magnificent things that we helped bring to the world didn't exist anymore. So art came out of, from the Muslim side, it came out of Islamic art, people who were doing calligraphy and things of that sort. On the church side, it came out of iconographers who were doing illuminated manuscripts. And then this kind of grew. It started in Egypt. Egypt was a very enlightened country at the turn of the century, the 20th century. They had the first school of art in Cairo in, I think, 1924, if I'm not mistaken. And then there was the school in Iraq, in Baghdad. There was the school in Casablanca. There were schools all over the region popping up for art, even here in Lebanon. And modernism, you know, people would travel to different places from different places in the region. People would come in from different places to the region. So there was influence going back and forth, and idea sharing, I suppose, going back and forth. And so the art scene started to develop at a rather feverish pitch at the turn of the 20th century. And there were art movements throughout the region, which were also tied to some of the revolutions that were going on within the region. I mean, this is a very tumultuous part of the world. It has been historically for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that shapes, of course, the subject matter. It shapes maybe the materials that some artists use. I'd say while our art history, as far as modern art history is concerned, may be 130, 40 years old, but art has been a part of our culture for millennia in this part of the world.
No, absolutely. I think maybe that is the focus maybe of some of my questioning, is about the modern art period, especially that 130, 140 years that you mentioned. Is there a reliable source for a history of Arab art in terms of that modern history, let's say over the last 130, 40 years? Are there historians, Arab historians? And also, are there Western narratives that differ from what really took place?
Well, I wouldn't blame it only on Western narratives, but I mean, you asked, is there a reliable source? Of course, there's the Dalloul Art Foundation site. That probably is the reference site now for scholars all over the world, museum directors, curators, anyone interested in anything Arab art. We cover over 400 artists there, all part of our collection, of course. But we made it a point to put out all of the research that we came across, because what we found was a lot of these so-called art historians would fudge information, because when we started putting timelines together while doing our research, we found inconsistencies in a lot of these sources. And when we went and did the research and asked why there were some rather large discrepancies, the response I got was, well, we didn't have reliable sources, references. There wasn't much information. Well, there wasn't much information when we went after that information either, but we had to do the sleuthing and the hard work and the calling people, family, friends, estates, verifying information through good old-fashioned hard research. It's out there. You just need to know where to go and find it. And we've made it a point to put this all out to the public free of charge, because it's if we want people to learn about our culture, our art, our artists, we need to put that knowledge out there and make it easily accessible for everybody to interact with. So I think now people are focusing, as is my foundation, a lot of energy on producing knowledge, whether it's through media, like this format, the podcast format, whether it's through video presentations, documentaries, docuseries, publications, books, monographs, catalogue raisonnés, where we have access to enough information to be able to put together a catalogue raisonné for an Arab artist. I mean, historically speaking, even in this short period of time, this 100 and let's say 50 years, documentation has been something that people here didn't pay too much attention to, and with all the turmoil going on, a lot of these archives get lost in the shuffle. Our artists, sadly enough, a lot of them, it would almost be impossible to put together a rather definitive catalogue raisonné of their work, just because a lot of this has never been documented. Now, we've been on a crusade. I've been on a crusade, at least with my personal friends, the artists, that is, to make sure that they photograph everything front and back and keep a clear record of what they produce, even if they don't know where it went, just to make sure that there's a record of it. Because it's important. If you want to have a rich art history, you have to record that history very carefully. I mean, in Europe, I don't know how many hundred catalogue raisonnés there are just for Picasso, for example. So we only have now, as of a couple of weeks ago, we now have 4 catalogue raisonnés for Arab artists. We have the Mahmoud Saeed, we have the Abdel Hadi Al-Gazzar. Before that, we have the Muhammad Qasimi from Morocco, Abdel Hadi Al-Gazzar, and now Jawad Salim. All 4 publications we very strongly sponsored because we think it's very important to get that sort of information out there in the public hand, and to give the public confidence in the artwork that they're looking at, and if they're thinking of acquiring that sort of art, to understand what they're buying.
You mentioned the foundation and the collection of works that it contains. What's your thought process on kind of the Arab world? And again, we're talking about modern art. We're not talking about the calligraphy or the geometric Islamic patterns or designs that came previously to the 19th century, but more of representative art. The Arab world seems to have dived in headfirst at the end of the 19th century without kind of the history of representative art. You know, as we see, you know, the Western or Eurocentric movements from the medieval stages all the way to the Renaissance and onwards, where then you had the Expressionist, Impressionists, and so on, where the Arab world just dived in right there at the end of the 19th century. Does that diminish anything at all? Does it provide less of a foundation? How do you view that, let's say, discovery of art that came about in the end of the 19th century?
Yeah, I don't think it diminishes it at all. I mean, if you look at art in the West, you were talking medieval through Renaissance, let's say, I mean, it was that very, very almost realistic as they could be, depending on the different styles they were trying to put out with, and they even used tapestry to record historic events in some countries. In Spain, for example, they did that quite a bit. Here in this part of the world, that didn't happen, I mean, till modernism came about, and that happened at around the same time in the West. Before that, it was all classic painting. I mean, it was Picasso who broke all the rules for everyone, and pretty much at the same time over here, this is when people got out of this calligraphy, Islamic geometric type of art, repetitive art on the Muslim side. These were basically the art that they would do inside the mosques and mausoleums and things of that sort. And iconography on the Christian side, like I said. So then we started getting these paysage, we started getting these figurative paintings, we started, depending on what school of art, these artists who traveled, whether it be from Egypt, from Lebanon, from Syria, some of them went west, some of them went east, and depending on where they went, they brought back some of these influences, and they actually very masterfully applied it to their own culture. So our artists you might see an artist that might remind you of Picasso, of a certain period of Picasso, but the subject matter and the way the subject matter was tackled is clearly Arab from this part of the world. So, and by contrast, a lot of these artists, including Picasso, who came to this part of the world and fell in love with it, took back some of our culture into his paintings and artwork. It's more of a two-way kind of street. I don't think either the West or the East has a monopoly on creativity and what could come out of a human being's spirit.
You mentioned also some schools, some art schools that kind of sprouted in the early 20th century. Is there a key moment, in your opinion, where the art world shifted from a kind of sporadic, individualistic effort to a more institutionalized, more structured way?
Well, look, I mean, in the 50s and 60s, in the 50s, during the revolutions in North Africa and Iraq, and then the Zionist occupation of Palestine, and the displacement of people, yeah, art kind of got very solidified around the politics of the region because there was turmoil almost everywhere. From Lebanon as early as the 50s, and then through our civil war in the mid-70s. But the whole region has been in turmoil. Whether it's Jordan, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, you name it. This whole part of the world has had some kind of curse put on it for the last 150 years or so. It's still home for a lot of us, and I'm sure, like you are, I'm very attached to my home, and I love my home. In spite of everything we go through, we kind of overcome all of that, and our artists actually manifest that in some of the most amazing ways. So we have a rich source of inspiration, if you will, and I'm using that term very loosely, to get them to produce some very visceral art.
But you don't think that there was one school, for example, or one geographic hub that really kind of launched a more, let's say, structured.
Look, in the 50s, I would say Egypt would have been that place with the fall of the monarchy and the rise of the republic. There were a few competing schools there, all driven by politics. Now, the one place where everybody had the liberty to express themselves in ways that they weren't able to in their own countries was Lebanon. So Lebanon was a very pivotal place in the 50s and 60s. They were called the golden years, where artists from Egypt and Palestine and Syria and Iraq and Tunis, Morocco, they all came to Lebanon and worked for a period of time or so because they could express anything. I mean, this even applied to poets and playwrights and songwriters. They all came to Lebanon and shared ideas because it was the one place where, even though a lot of countries were promoting and pushing culture, maybe more in a more propagandic way, like Egypt, Iraq, Syria, they all had very rich cultural programs which promoted art, but the only place where you could very liberally express exactly what you mean through art was Lebanon. So Lebanon was a melting point. You asked about schools, and yes, I could rattle off a dozen names of different schools around the region that popped up at different points in time. But one place that made a difference for a lot of them, I would say, was Lebanon, because even in the 50s, there was a fight going on between the East and the West, between the Soviets and the Americans at the time, who were trying to push this whole notion of abstract art rather, and get away from the very figurative, more propaganda type art that the Soviets were using. And so they were pushing this modern and abstract modernism, and they actually sent someone here from the State Department, the department that, you know, they usually send the spies through, to infiltrate the art community and to push this notion of abstraction into the Lebanese psyche. And to his chagrin, he found that we were way ahead of him on that, with people like Salwa Rawda Shair and several other notable artists of the time, that he really didn't have anything to push. He, on the contrary, learned about Khaliqul Ahlan. My artist friends show up, Ayman, Sirwan, and I think Abid. Where was I? Yes. Farron. This is John Farron. I remember. Yes, he came and he took the Islamic art, the shapes, the geometric shapes. He took colors from this part of the world that he hadn't thought about playing with before into his art. He's a very, very important American modernist. But he, and a lot was written about him during this period, about how they were trying to change the ideology or the thought process of Arab artists. And like I said, to their chagrin, they found we were way ahead of them, whether it was with Iraqi artists or Egyptian artists or Moroccan or Palestinian or Syrian or Lebanese. So our artists here were already thinking beyond where the West wanted us to be. So they were pleasantly surprised to find that they weren't coming to educate a bunch of ignorant Arabs. They were already there.
I think that's a very valid point in terms of our speed or our ability to transcend expectations as well in terms of the expressive arts. I've seen that happen in different expressive platforms, whether it's performing arts, visual arts, music, song, dance, all within the same timeline, as you mentioned, within the midst of the 20th century. Now, one thing you did mention that is quite a topic of concentration on my channel, which is Zionism. I know it's a touchy subject, but I think an important element. Your late father, Dr. Ramzi Dalloul, the founder of the foundation, is actually born in Haifa, correct, in 1935.
Actually, my father was born in Haifa in 1935, that is correct. He left in 1948 on the back of a truck when he was 13 and came to Lebanon. I don't know how that shapes someone's psyche. I haven't been through that experience, to be honest with you, myself, so I couldn't say how that would that would affect me, how that affected him.
But it would have an impact on someone's...
Well, I'll tell you, my father was a collector. He took a machine gun approach to buying art. He wasn't the founder of the foundation, actually, I was.
Oh, okay.
He gave me the burden of sorting through all of the art that he had collected over about 55 years and told me to make heads and tails out of it. So, so I took a crash course in this subject. This was, mind you, about 15 years ago. So I've learned a few tricks between then and now, thanks predominantly to my friends, my artist friends. Who brought me up to speed. But my dad was quite a character, and he was an Arab nationalist, which is why this collection has to span Morocco through Iraq and everything in between, down to Sudan and Yemen. He was one of these people who was very inclusive of, the culture around us, and encouraged us to be as well. So we don't look at art only from a Lebanese perspective or Syrian perspective or Palestinian or Jordanian perspective. We see it from the perspective of the entire Arab nation, which is quite large.
I think the reference to Zionism in the case of bringing up your father, I think the element of a national identity and the questioning, or let's say the narrative, the Zionist narrative that presents that really there was no national identity for many of the Arabs in the region. There was no real Palestinians. There was no real Lebanese. And I think art has something, different to say about that. It can easily debunk a lot of these premises, can't they?
Yeah, look, our DNA proves that we've been here for thousands of years, from way back when the Canaanites and the Sumerians and the Akkadians were roaming these coasts over here. So the fact that there were not people that were indigenous from this part of the world is a little bit of a stretch and a fantasy for anyone to say. Art has been recording history from when cavemen learned how to draw on cave walls. So there's a very rich history out there for anyone to investigate that will tell a very different story than the story that's being told by our friends down south, our cousins, I should say.
And does a part of your collection reflect a large contingent of, let's say, early Palestinian, Lebanese work that kind of supersedes the creation of the Zionist nation?
Yes, we look, there's something I have to be very clear about, because I make sure my entire team toes this line. They always ask me, what's your political stance on this, or what's your political stance on that? Now, as an art foundation, as an all-inclusive art foundation, we're not in the business of taking political stances with anyone, one way, shape, or the other. Personally, I'm very agnostic to that sort of thing. It's not my cup of tea. And I don't care for it to be my foundation's cup of tea either. Now, having said this, art from this part of the world is highly politicized and politically charged. So our job is to present the art and the artists. They're quite capable through their art of telling whatever story they want to tell and taking whatever political position they want to take. And art, like I said, being an archive of history, all you got to do is look at it and you understand. They say a picture is worth a million words. All you got to do is take a look at a painting that's very expressive of a political situation or a particular situation, and you'll understand what's going on. And when you see it done consistently by many artists from many parts of this part of the world, you begin to understand that, no, this was not some fable that was told somewhere along the line in history. This is something that really existed.
They paint a picture.
They paint a picture, absolutely.
Taking a step away from the production of art or the generation of art. Now, we live in a society that kind of struggles with representative art in terms of being an acceptable or an unacceptable mode of expression. I'm talking mainly from a Muslim perspective. Has that hindered really the progress of the art world, or the art world just breaks through those obstacles from a generation perspective and also from a consumption perspective?
Look, I mean, we have paintings in this collection from the early 20th century where painters were painting complete nudes, beautiful nudes. We have over 100 of them in this collection from artists from all over the Arab world. So this recent religious conservatism that people keep talking about is exactly that. It's something recent. And it's something that most artists will find a way to penetrate through, if you will. I don't see it as a hindrance. The only hindrance is you can't show that kind of art still in some parts of the Arab world. Like, for example, in Gulfi museums, you're never going to see a nude. I get it. They're not ready for it yet. They'll be ready for it at some point. It's the same for us, you know. I mean, you know, first time I remember when I was a little kid and I went to a museum and I saw a nude lady, I was like freaking out. There's a nude lady in the painting, Mom. You know, some of those old Renaissance paintings. And so, yeah, it was, you know, that's where we're raised in a society where, you know, that type of thing is taboo, and it shouldn't be. And I hope, and I'm sure, we'll see beyond that at some point.
Just a follow-up to that. Do you suspect part of that also is with the whole educational sector and the kind of stripping away of art and the expressive arts from curricula today? I mean, we see a diminishing role of art and expression in our schools.
Yeah, to some degree, yes, I do agree. It is partly education. I mean, you know, when you do that, you're going to bring up a child and mold that child in a way very different from one who was brought up in an environment where art was embraced and expression was embraced. So yes, it does make a difference, education. And not just that there is education, but the right kind of education.
And do we have any success stories within Arab nations today where there is that good balance of how and what is being taught within the educational systems for?
Well, look, I mean, for example, in the Gulf now, they're really embracing art and culture, and you're seeing some really amazing artists come out of places like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. Those didn't come out of nowhere, and these are some luminary artists. They came out of their love for art being embraced by their environment, so and by their school curriculum, because you know, one of the biggest growing segments in the Gulf, in Saudi, and most of the Gulf states is culture, art and culture. They're spending obnoxious amounts of money building facilities for that, and educating their population about art and culture. So I think we're going to see hopefully another renaissance of sorts in people changing their attitudes about art and what's risque and what's not, what's taboo and what's not.
You mentioned the word renaissance, and it brings up the kind of progression of the Arab world and the psyche of the Arab individual from what was, you know, a conservatism to a modernity, let's say, where before it was all community and now it's individuality. Not all individuality, but it's kind of this progression, this migration from a we to an I equation. How does that impact the contemporary Arab art scene? Do you actually see that evolution, or not really? That's not something that is prevalent.
No, yes, you do see that very, very loud and clearly in the contemporary art movement throughout. Like I said, I mean, we have some amazing minds here. We have some amazing artists that are popping up all over the place who are producing, in spite of the turmoil and the negative atmosphere that we live in, are producing amazing, great art. So yeah, you know, I see there's an inverse relationship between when things get bad and how good the art gets.
Inverse in the sense that the art gets better.
The inverse in the sense that the art gets better. Yeah, the art gets better. They dig deep, and they find inspiration in what they're going through, and rather than have it bring them down, they actually use it as a way to lift themselves and the people around them up.
It's interesting how you bring up this. I guess you repeat it quite often, the word turmoil. In our region, and how that's reflected in the expressions of the various artists around. Is there a clear-cut way where you can actually see an era and how that society represents its expression, whether it's a high or a low?
You know, I hadn't looked at it that way, but I suppose there could be. I don't see why there wouldn't be, because, well, oh, we tend to be a very creative crew in this part of the world. I mean, all you have to do is go outside and see the beautiful sea and smell the flowers and hear the banging around and the honking of cars, and you're like, okay, I'm alive. We're good. People tend to be very creatively inspired in this part of the world, probably because of the environment they live in, I suppose. But no, to answer your question is, I hadn't thought about any clear-cut manifestation of that. But if I rack my head and do some research and find some correlations there, I'll be happy to come back and share them with you.
I look at it sometimes. It's not the only two ways, but I see a way typically with expression. Either it's reflective of the situation, or it's an escapism from a situation. So it can take.
I think there's a bit of both of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
If we could kind of zoom in on the Lebanon scene, I mean, with what Lebanon is, Lebanon is home for you over the past 40, 50 years. How do you qualify the art scene in Lebanon?
Alive and kicking.
All-encompassing statement.
It really is. I mean, look, I've been to several art openings recently, and I've been amazed at the level of art and the quality and dedication to craftsmanship that our artists across the board have been showing here. We've been through some really shitty times, and we've just gotten through a war. We had a financial meltdown. We had the fourth largest bomb in the world go off over here. We've had one nasty thing after the other, and people still dig deep and they find their creative juices, I suppose, because our artists are producing some amazing art.
Was there an altered landscape to art during the Civil War in Lebanon?
Well, look, I mean, a lot of the great artists that exist today were born and grew up during the Civil War. One of my best friends, Ayman Balbaki, who I said hello to walking in here while we're having this podcast, was born the year the war started and grew up knowing nothing other than the war. And this actually really affected his subject matter to a large degree, and probably the way he actually paints. But yes, it does take its toll on those artists. I mean, even the ones that were there, witnessing it, painting it. We discovered an artist in the United States who left Lebanon during the Civil War and came back and left again. And, some of these paintings are eerie. So yeah, they do affect the art, but beautiful at the same time. You don't know whether you want to cry or laugh at them, smile at them.
Just a statement you made earlier about how there's quite a substantial and focused, not resurgence, but surgence of art from the Arabian Gulf states. You see a lot of new artists come out of there. Now, if we were to draw a line, and this is not a politicized question by any means, but in terms of societies that are more stable, more, let's say, thriving, prosperous, as opposed to the other cross-section of Arab societies that are in that turmoil, whether it's through wars, through instability, political strife. Do you see a clear-cut line there in terms of expression, or no, that really doesn't come into play either?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that comes into play. I mean, I think it's great that those societies are embracing art the way they are and encouraging artists to focus on their art and their craftsmanship and really nurturing them and creating nurturing environments for them. So no, on the contrary, hats off to them. We've been dealing with what we've been dealing with. For us, this is a way of life. So everything is relative, I suppose. So in spite of that, people still find ways to overcome that and bring those creative juices out. We're not new to this.
No, no, we're not. We had a discussion previously, and I wanted to touch on this question concerning the growth of Arab art and the future of Arab art. Over the past 15 years, we've seen many new museums being launched across the region, namely in the Gulf states. You have the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others who have really introduced global institutional museums into their nations. Now, one of the questions there is what's the intention for these? Is these to kind of import Western art to exhibit and to show, or is this to kind of create a mechanism or an engine for the creation of more expressive arts in the region, for Arab art to fill all these large institutions that we're seeing come up?
Well, this is a question you should probably ask them. It would be presumptuous for me to answer that kind of a question, but I would hope that it's because they want to encourage people to embrace art, even their own societies. I mean, they're building these museums not only for the tourists coming to see them, but they're building them to enlighten and to broaden the minds of their own populations. So I would hope that that's where they're headed with that.
Well, the reason why I ask, and I do understand, it's their strategy, and their strategy ideally would not only be for the implementation of an edifice, but actually to have a mechanism that educates, promotes, markets, and encourages people to produce art. But the reason why I asked that is from a personal experience when I went to one of the museums in Abu Dhabi, and I experienced really that kind of tilted, the heavy weight placed on imported art or Western Eurocentric art versus the localized art, which kind of took the backseat within this institution.
I mean, they're getting their footing there, and they're working on balancing that out, if you will. I mean, there's only one museum in the UAE right now, that's the Louvre, and they do a very nice job of showing you different civilizations around the same time. Museums don't do that. They take you from A to Z of one civilization. They mix them as you're moving around in time, which I found very fascinating. And it's the first time they've done something like that, and in museums, and it worked out really nicely, actually. They did want to cover art from our part of the world, but that was a rather weak presentation of it. And they do acknowledge that. I know they're working on that. They have the new Guggenheim coming up, and that's going to be exciting because I know they've been buying aggressively for that collection. And even the Louvre has been making some acquisitions to improve the offering that they show in those particular rooms. But I think, these types of edifices, you called them, or institutions of education and enlightenment, as I like to refer to them, they take time to get embedded into the society and get their programs kind of in sync with what the folks around them are responding to or not. And I think given some time, they'll do it with the best of them out there. And I know they're not spending all this money just to build an edifice. They're doing it because they do want their societies to be educated, enlightened, broad-minded, seeing things they wouldn't normally see, educated on how that all works. None of that needs to be something that's exclusively for the West. We can do that with the best of them.
When you mentioned aggressive purchasing, you're talking about Arab art, purchasing of...
Talking about purchasing art from this part of the world for that particular museum.
What are the new projects for the Dalloul Art Foundation? What are some of the things that you see are... You mentioned the whole educational role, and I think that's a very valiant effort for all of us to kind of build towards a more enlightened or an awareness about any type of expression, whether it's art or otherwise. What are some of the projects that you're looking at over the imminent future?
Well, we are focusing a lot on the media production house that we've built internally. We're working on several media projects, whether it's a docu-series or video presentations. We constantly work on publications and continue to work on publications. So we're in the process of evaluating several right now. We continuously work with museums around the world to educate them about art from this part of the world and encourage them to build shows around this type of art. So it's not unusual to have, within a year's period of time, 100 or so pieces traveling around the world in museums in various places. So we have a lot of that going on as well. And then we have our own internal shows that we do here at the foundation, or in conjunction with local institutions like Sursa Museum or the National Museum, things of that sort.
What are the obstacles that you confront when you is it those international institutions asking for art, or you're actually presenting art to them to?
No, I wouldn't. They're very open. We have some very interesting art to show, so they're very, very interested. We've not had any resistance to that. I wouldn't say that I've had, but my only obstacle is my own time and the bandwidth of the foundation. There are about a dozen plus of us working constantly here, about 20 people at the foundation, between local employees and contractors we use in various places for various things. So its bandwidth, I would say, is my only obstacle.
Well, Basel, I want to thank you so much for your time.
But it's
really
been wonderful. It's been wonderful being here with you. I've had a blast over the last couple of weeks listening to almost all of your podcasts.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
For anyone listening who hasn't gone back and listened to some of Tara's very, very enlightening and educating podcasts, I strongly educate you to do that. Strongly advise you to do that, because they're definitely worth the time you spend with them. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate all the effort you're doing with the Dalloul Art Foundation. Again, apologies for misspeaking, saying that you weren't but you are the founder of the Dalloul Art Foundation.
That's okay. I just like to clarify that point. Nobody handed me this foundation. I had to build it from the ground up.
Well, at least it wasn't someone far and remote. It was Allah yarhama your
My
father.
dad. That's very true.
So
That's very true.
I will.
He did build a bulk of the collection. So
Absolutely.
that credit all goes to him.
Absolutely recognized globally, to be honest, for that amazing feat. So we'll definitely share all the links to the foundation. I invite all the viewers to dive in. I think as I've looked at it many times, the Dalloul Art Foundation puts a really comprehensive story about art in the Middle East and the Arab world. Thank you so much.
And a new redesign is coming up soon, so stay tuned. It's going to be a lot more user friendly, hopefully, and we have some very interesting things going on with AI in there as well. Take it easy.